Hello YouTube, good morning. Hope you're doing well. Um, the topic for today is simple and compound interest. So let's get busy. Okay, first of all, I would like to explain the concept of principal and interest. So I'll explain it using the stick figure here. We'll call this person Mr. Poor. Now, Mr. Poor has a lot of aims and ambitions in life. He wants to buy a lot of stuff, but he doesn't have any money. Enter Mr. Rich, who has a lot of money. Now, Mr. Poor wants to buy stuff and he asks Mr. Rich for some money. And as you know, there is nothing in life as a free lunch. So Mr. Rich comes into an agreement with Mr. Poor and says, I'll pay you some money, but when you return my money, I want something extra. The amount of money Mr. Rich pays Mr. Poor is known as the principal. The amount of money that Mr. Poor returns is known as the principal plus interest, or the amount. I hope this is clear. By the way, principal with an AL is the spelling that we are looking for. Principal with a PLE means something else. So no. Yep, you got that right. And the next point is the interest. We'll talk a little bit more about the principal and the interest in the coming slides. Now, there are two flavors of interest. One is simple interest and the other one is compound interest. Simple interest has a formula which says P into T into R by 100. P stands for the principal amount, T stands for the time duration in years, and R stands for the rate of interest at which um, the interest is charged on the principal. So this entire amount divided by 100 is your simple interest. If you add the principal to this, this becomes the amount. Let's take a simple calculation. Let's suppose Mr. Rich loans Mr. Poor $100 for 20 years at a 2% interest rate. If we simplify this equation, so I like to cut the zeros for the division, I get an interest of $40 and a principal which remains $100, of course. My amount would be 140. So Mr. Poor has to pay Mr. Rich $140 back at the end of 20 years. This, my friends, is the simple interest formula. Now, we'll go a little bit more in detail. So, Mr. Poor, let's say, owes $120 at a 10% interest rate for a year, and let's suppose that the term is 1 year. At the end of the term, Mr. Poor has to pay back $120 plus an interest of $12 calculated using the same formula I mentioned above. So in total, it would amount to $132 to Mr. Rich. I use the same example in the compound interest formula as well. Let's talk about compound interest. The formula for compound interest is a little bit more complex. You have P again, which stands for the principal. You have the number 1 plus R, which stands for the rate of interest, N, which means how often compounding happens, and T, the time or the time frame at which compounding happens. So I'll explain a little bit more about N and T. So suppose Mr. Rich gives or loans Mr. Poor $100 at 2% interest for 1 year, and this is compounded, or let's say for 20 years, and this is compounded every month. So the values for P would be 100, which is my principal. The rate is 2%, which is the interest rate per year or per time period. T stands for time period. N would be compounded monthly. So since it's compounded monthly, it would be the number of compounds in a time period. So for our case, we say the time period is 1 year. Um, the number of compounds in 1 year would be 12, and T stands for the number of time periods. So 20 years would be 20 over here. Let's look at the formula and let's look at the calculation. So we have 100 principal. 1 plus 2 is the interest rate. 100, of course, is because of the percentage. So this is compounded monthly. It would be 12 here. And this compounding happens for 20 years. So we enter 20 here. This n, of course, remains the same. When we simplify this equation, yeah, we multiply 100, 1 plus 1 by 600. So it becomes a 601 divided by 600 to the power 240. And after simplification, we see that the final value of the amount, this formula is for the amount, by the way, the final value of the amount is $149. So it's slightly above $140 that we got for the simple interest. Okay, let's try to understand why compounding increases the interest amount. Let's take a different example. Um, so let's suppose Mr. Poor owes $120 at 10% interest rate for 1 year. Let us suppose we have monthly compounding. And what monthly compounding means is that every month the interest is calculated and added to the principal. So at the end of the first month, the interest is calculated based on the simple interest formula. So 120, which is my principal, into time, which is 1 by 12th of a year, so 1 month, into the interest rate divided by 100 because it's a percent. This gives me an interest of 1 for the first month. This 1 is an outstanding interest. It's not paid immediately. This gets added to the principal. For the second month, interest is calculated again on the 121 and then added to the principal once again. So the principal, instead of remaining constant, increases every month, and at the end of the year, you have to pay the cumulative incremental interest along with the original principal of 120. I hope that was clear. Uh, and that brings us to the end of the presentation. I hope my style of teaching and explanation was clear to you. If you guys like the video, please hit a like. I would appreciate that. Subscribe and let me know what I could improve on and what are the topics you would like me to present. I I would be happy to take sessions on basic mathematics and basic sciences. Thank you and cheers.